Hi, and thanks for watching. In this video, I'm going to be talking about workplace burnout. It's a common topic that I often am asked about when I'm doing conflict resolution training. And obviously, there's a pretty strong correlation between workplace conflict and workplace burnout. I use that word deliberately, correlation, as opposed to cause, because it's not exactly clear in many of the situations that I deal with whether the burnout caused the workplace conflict. Of course, when people are feeling more frazzled and irritable, and I guess they're more likely to escalate, which can contribute to conflict. But going through workplace conflict is also incredibly stressful in itself, so that can also be one of the factors that contributes to burnout. So, given the fact that these two areas are pretty strongly related, I wanted to talk about workplace burnout, including the different kinds of things that can cause it, what it looks like, and then what you can do at the individual level or at an organizational level if you're in a leadership role. So, what it is, workplace burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. So, there's those three layers there of the body, the kinesthetic stress, emotional thought, feelings, mood, affect, as well as mental exhaustion, cognitive fatigue, and it's caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So we're not usually talking about burnout as a result of a negative interaction with your boss, for example. We're talking about a long-standing historic pattern of stresses. It can occur when employees feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet the constant demands of their job. Now, other kinds of burnout, like uh, burnout as a carer, for example, if you're caring for an elderly person, someone with a disability, burnout can also occur in those kind of situations as well. And it's a similar kind of pattern. It's this constant, unrelenting set of demands which are taxing your resources, whether that's the physical resources, emotional resources, or mental resources that you have in the moment. Over a period of time, this is the kind of thing that can contribute to burnout. So we're really talking about the balance between the resources that we have and then the different sets of demands that we face. One of the things that I've noticed about burnout, and that's echoed in the research, is that it's the kind of thing that creeps up on us. It's a little bit like the frog that gets slowly cooked in the boiling water and doesn't seem to notice the fact that the water temperature is increasing and increasing and increasing. Similarly, often when we're in a context where there's a high level of stress, we might not be aware of the way that that's building up for us. Sometimes we see ourselves snapping and yelling at a kid, for example, if we're a parent, or being overly short with a customer, or tense and a little bit rude, aggressive, irritable with a colleague or a coworker, maybe even our boss when they're coming to us with another demand. So we might start to see the cracks around the edges, the fraying that starts to develop. And similarly to the causes of workplace burnout, that we have that behavioral, the emotional, and the mental or the cognitive layer on top, you might also see that fraying around the edges in the behavior. Maybe you're feeling particularly tired and stressed, or you've noticed yourself shaking, trembling. Maybe it's being more likely to pick up illnesses. You've noticed your health hasn't been what it normally is. It might be at the emotional layer, like more likely to react. You find yourself unable to stay calm or think positively when you're dealing with a particular challenge. Or it might be at the mental layer. It could be difficulty concentrating, not able to come up with options, not able to solve a problem. For me, I particularly notice it in communication when I'm feeling stressed and that burnout starts to creep up. What I notice is that I can't communicate clearly, I can't articulate myself, I don't know what to say next in conversations, and when I'm delivering training workshops, I find it more difficult to choose the right words and phrases. The causes of workplace burnout are really at three different levels. These are some of the main factors that's correlated. A lack of control. When people feel like they don't have control over their work or their environment, it increases the chances of them experiencing burnout. Having unclear expectations, not knowing what's expected or how to meet the expectations. There's a particular correlation that I talk about in my conflict resolution training where people have a high sense of responsibility but a low level of autonomy. That's the kind of thing that puts people more at risk of burnout. And when there's a lack of clear expectations, the risk there is that we'll continue to take on board more and more responsibility because we're not working in the kind of task that's finished or done, and then we can switch off and go home. The third area is unrealistic workloads. Maybe it's just a simple fact of there's too much to do in too little time. Again, if you're looking at a different kind of burnout, like a carer responsibility, dealing with an ex partner, managing kids and work, if you're a single parent, then these three factors are often also common and present there. That lack of control, a single parent who doesn't have any options for family support, or there's no options for respite care or out of home care for our kids, then she's more likely to experience burnout. The lack of clarity around expectations, maybe if you've got a child who seems to be not well, but you're not exactly sure what they need, it's the kind of thing that sits and weighs very heavily on you and causes you more stress. And then that unrealistic workload, maybe there's just too much to do in the time frame that you've got available. So it's helpful to look at some of these main causes because it also gives us information about what we can do to respond. If we think that we might be experiencing burnout, I guess the first step is identifying which symptoms are there for us, especially if our goal is to prevent things from escalating to the point where we do start to become negatively affected. So, the first sign that you might notice is emotional exhaustion, feeling just emotionally worn out and drained. This might impact your sleep, and longer term fatigue is also a common factor of burnout. So, if you're noticing yourself either not able to get to sleep because your mind is racing, or maybe you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and all of a sudden you think about that particular responsibility that you've got, and then it's difficult then to get back in the sleep state, relax again. It might be signs of emotional exhaustion building up for you. Depersonalization is another common symptom. This is where cynicism starts to creep in. It's this detached attitude to work. In some of the different not for profit organizations where I've worked, I noticed this cynicism often creeping in the way that people talked about the clients and the families that they were working with, sometimes the sector, sometimes it was government and funding agencies. So they might say things like, it's just another one of those kind of parents, or here we go again, it's another one of these kind of attorney generals regulating the family law system. When you notice that lack of hope or an increased propensity to generalize, to sort of make assumptions about the client or the family that you're working with, as opposed to looking at each person as a unique individual who's got different aspirations, strengths, weaknesses, etc., they might all be signs of the depersonalization creeping in. When people start to talk about their work in a very detached way, not identifying the relationships or the difference that they might making in the people that they're dealing with. And then the third area is reduced personal accomplishment. It might even be feeling like you're not doing a good job at your work, you're failing, or a negative self assessment, like the work that you do doesn't make any difference, no one notices the extra effort that you're making. So, what's the point? This is often a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness when you're thinking about the future of whatever the role is that you're in, if it's a workplace context or other responsibilities if it's on the family front. Some of the negative impacts of burnout, can exist both at the individual or at the organizational level. In terms of individual, it often has a physical manifestation. There's an increased chance of cardiovascular disease, for example, or particular kinds of musculoskeletal disorders. It can contribute to mental health issues, either aggravating and worsening existing issues, or maybe it could be a trigger for the onset of new mental health issues if it's not something you've experienced before. This can include exhaustion and particularly anxiety and depression, two of the most prevalent and common mental health issues at, at most workplaces, at least in Australia, and I know in many other Western countries as well. And there's a significant impact on job satisfaction, motivation, and overall sense of well-being. What you might notice is that when people are experiencing burnout, they can slip into a negative spiral. So they feel stressed out about work, they think they didn't do a good job, they can't see any difference down the track, so things are unlikely to improve. So they have a few glasses of wine, a few beers, And it impacts their sleep. When we drink even one standard drink, it raises our resting heart rate for the entirety of our night's sleep. Often around 2 or 3 a.m., our body's working towards rectifying the imbalance in blood sugar. So there's a release of adrenaline. So there's a reason why, if you've had a few beers and you wake up at 3 a.m. and all of a sudden you think about that difficult meeting that you've got at work tomorrow, your mind is unable to then relax. You enter into this fight or flight state. And it's partly due to your body trying to process the alcohol that's been introduced to the system. So, alcohol makes you feel relaxed and helps you to switch off and unwind for about an hour. And then after that, you need to either continue to drink or your body works to get back in balance. And unfortunately, some of the negative aspects of stress can be increased as a result. But what you'll notice is that as that job satisfaction and overall sense of well-being starts to decline, people turn to unhelpful coping mechanisms like gambling, drug addiction, social media, pornography, isolating themselves, not going to the gym, not eating healthy. And of course, all of this makes sense because we're craving dopamine, so you want that block of chocolate that's in the fridge. The challenge is that then you wake up the next day feeling even worse about yourself. Now look at what the hell I've done. I've got no self control. What good am I at all? And then it starts to impact our self esteem even worse. And then when something goes wrong at work, we tend to catastrophize. There's also an impact on organizations. It contributes to a decrease in productivity and performance, leads to a higher rate of absenteeism or what's called presenteeism, where people are showing up to work but kind of doing the bare minimum, I guess. An increase of staff turnover and an increase in healthcare, particularly in countries where you organize health insurance as a staff group as a whole. What it means effectively is that people are covering the cost of workplace burnout through the subsidies that they're paying. And even in a public system, like in Australia, we have a public health system. We're all covering the cost of that because burnout has a whole bunch of flow and economic effects down the road, including family breakdown, for example, drug and alcohol use, increased cardiovascular disease, and the healthcare necessary to support people through that, heart attack incidence rates, etc. So there is a healthcare cost, whether that's at the organization or at the societal level, and we all, I guess, pay the price of that to some extent. There are self-assessment tools that you can do. If you're watching this video on my website, I'll include a few links down below, both resources for recovery as well as self-assessment. But a lot of people, when I do this kind of training, they feel like they might be burnt out. Even just looking at the words on the screen there, I'm sure that some of them probably jump out at you. And when people say, look, I feel like I might be burnt out, just looking at that, I'm experiencing a lot of that. I often say to them, well, I guess one of the signs that that might be what's happening is if it's been a pattern. If there's a recent incident, a spike in busyness, of course you're feeling tired. So just because you describe that as fatigue, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're experiencing burnout. But if you've been fatigued constantly for 3 months, then yeah, I think that that might be a symptom that you would consider doing something about if you don't want it to continue to get worse. So, at the individual level, what can we do? Well, a lot of it is to do with self care, and there's a few different levels, I guess, that we could think about self care. One is in the moment. So, while we're doing our work, what do we do? For me, I've realized literally this morning that I need to reduce the amount of coffees that I'm drinking. I'm using it as a coping strategy just because I've got so much that I need to get done at the moment. And I've noticed it's contributing to my anxiety. So, for me, tomorrow we'll be looking at a different option than coffee. Probably try some green tea or peppermint tea or something, or just white knuckle it through. I've done that a few times in my life before. Stress management, when you notice that the stress is building up, then doing something about it. That's that second layer of self care. It's almost when you go home. Before you walk in the door, what do you need to do to reset yourself so that you're not carrying the stresses of today's work in and dumping it or it's spilling out onto your family inadvertently? So, doing a few moments of deep breathing or a guided relaxation app or journaling in your book just for 5 minutes before you go in the door, walk around the building, get rid of some of that adrenaline that's built up, go to the gym before you get home. All of those would be good options for stress management. Physical exercise is a particularly effective way of dealing with stress. And one of the best types of exercise that you can do is interval training. So sprinting for 30 seconds and then going at a slower pace for 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes or whatever you want to do. Lifting weights and doing a set of 12 reps and then taking a few minutes of break in between. Sprinting on the treadmill and then walking slower, going up a hill and then walking slowly back down. The reason that this type of training is particularly helpful for dealing with stress is that when we sprint, when we do lift the heavy weights, we get into a physical state very similar to fight or flight. Our heart's racing, our adrenaline's pumping, blood pressure is high, etc. And then our body practices calming itself back down again. And then we sprint and get in that escalated state, and then our body practices calming ourselves down again. And it's worth just observing that and taking note of it, like directing your focus to your physical body when that's happening. And what you'll notice is that you start to detach from that physical sensation of the heart racing, the blood pumping, the shaking, the agitation, whatever it is, which means that when it comes up in other contexts, like conflict at work, you recognize it as just, this is just escalation, and I know how to calm myself down again. Take deep breaths, take a few, like stretch, do whatever you need to do to recover in the moment. The last type of self-care that you could use is longer term. It's things like setting boundaries, work-life balance. So that might be at work, saying no to your boss who asks you to pick up that extra shift, for example. It might be boundaries with yourself, like you accepting that although you could do this extra shift, that probably now's not the right time. You just don't have the physical energy to deal with it. You need to find a balance. It might be engaging in different activities in your downtime, like spending time with the people who fill you up and make you feel good, as opposed to the 10th family function that you've had to go to this month, when these kind of things are always very draining. Well, you might need to think strategically about how many of those you go to and which ones it's acceptable, even if it's not ideal, to just say no, you can't make it. And then thinking deliberately about how to relax. This is something I've been noticing a lot recently, is that people have slipped into relaxation patterns that aren't working for them. Like, for example, you might open up Netflix thinking that, watching a TV series or a movie or something is a good way to relax, right? But what happens is that you jump between, like, you start watching something and you're dissatisfied. You're not sure if it's the best thing that you could watch, or you remember that you've actually seen this show, or you can remember why you didn't continue watching it last time because this particular character is really annoying. So then you change to something else and then change to something else. And before you know it, an hour's gone by, you've watched 10 minutes of 6 different things and you're feeling really stressed. It's often at a subconscious level. You're just frustrated. It's like, oh, for goodness sakes, what's the point? Throw the remote down. And was that what you were aiming for? Is that the state that you were hoping to be in when you decided to start watching? So, one of the things that you might need to do is just decide how long you'll spend doing something, or structure it in a particular way. Like, now for the first 10 minutes, all you want to do is find 5 good options for shows that you could watch, and then you watch one per night over the next week. And even if it's something that's not great, you've made a commitment to watch it, so you'll stick with it for at least an hour or so. Or if you flick through 3 different shows, maybe turn off the TV and go and play guitar or do some yoga or something like that. Might be a better way to relax. The other thing I've noticed is that people are craving consumption, so they want to watch a show or eat chocolate or eat fatty foods or salty chips, or they want the consumption of social media and endless doom scrolling, or they want the consumption of, even sometimes it's education, like people are, what would you call it? It's like procrastinating and relaxing at the same time, putting things off. And another one that they can do is procrastinate and educate at the same time. It's like, I'm learning, this is educational. But what they're actually doing is just killing the time. And then when it gets to the end of the night, they're feeling really stressed and worked up because they haven't done stuff that was sitting there to do, or they haven't had a chance to properly relax. So it's worth thinking about what relaxation techniques actually work for you. It might be something like getting a and massager and having it on your back while you're watching, or a heat pack, or maybe it's making a really nice cup of tea or cooking without looking at your phone. Maybe it is something like a 15-minute yoga. I've been incredibly surprised at how personally beneficial yoga has been for me. Whereas 6 months ago, I never would have thought that I could do it consistently or that it would be so helpful. But when I walk in the door and I'm feeling stressed, I need to make a decision about what to do and which of those relaxation techniques is going to get me to the state that I want to be. I don't usually feel like I want to do yoga. I never really do feel like I want to do yoga. But what I want is that state after I've done yoga where I'm feeling limber and physically relaxed. I'm feeling satisfied and good about myself. I've done some physical activity. It helps me sleep later on that night. So I don't want the activity of doing the yoga, I want the outcome. And ironically, I think most people don't want the outcome of watching Netflix and eating chocolate on the couch. They want the activity of eating the chocolate and the Netflix on the couch, but it doesn't lead to a state that they want. And so, if we make decisions based on this very slightly longer term consequence, then we would often do something quite different. And that's one of the ways I've been coaching myself almost is to say, well, what do I need right now? How do I want to feel? If I'm going to show up and be a good dad or a good husband or productive, what do I need for me? And it might be that I need to bite the bullet and do something that doesn't feel good in the moment, like exercise, because it will lead to that long term state that I think, deep down probably craving. At an organizational level, supportive work environments in general are helpful. So there's at those three levels, the physically, the emotionally, and the mentally supportive work environments. Promoting autonomy, giving people a chance to have a say and input in decisions that affect them, and to make decisions around their work where possible. So allowing that autonomy means that the work often becomes a lot more fulfilling. Allowing participation in planning, in leadership activities, for example, in goal setting and prioritization, and recognizing achievements. One of the things that often leads to burnout is when people are going the extra mile, putting in the hard yards and doing a lot of work, and it just doesn't feel like it's making any difference and that no one's noticing. So it could be just the informal, like, attaboy, you're doing a really good job. Just wanted to say thanks. I've noticed how consistent you've been lately. Or saying to them, I just want to give you a heads up. I'd noticed that family that moved into the house that you'd worked on, and they've commented a number of times on just how high quality the workmanship was. So I just wanted to pass that on for you and let you know that it's really something that I've noticed, as well as the clients when I've talked with them. Looking at options for flexible work environments is something that really helps burnout, like work from home options, for example, flexible hours, allowing people different ways of structuring their work. Providing stress management resources. This could be as simple as putting a whiteboard in the lunchroom with, ideas for looking after myself or something like that. Ways of connecting, like a barbecue or a lunch with your team, or putting a gratitude journal on the table and people can write things that they're grateful for and then you read them at the end of the month. It might be having a gym or an exercise program, or inviting someone in to give in office massages or yoga lessons, or it would depend on your team, but thinking proactively about this is important, and as an organization we want to support you. These are some of the things that we're doing. The benefit of that is not just that you give them those interventions and they work. There's also the message that they get around working somewhere where people care about them. Looking at options for fostering a positive culture. That could be things like being recognition types of programs, being able to nominate a hero for the past month, something that's good, setting goals together, celebrating achievements together. When we're developing this kind of positive culture, we're almost protecting staff preemptively from some of the negative impacts of burnout that can come up. So, given all of that and what I've talked about, what I would suggest is to have a think about what stands out to you. What are your main takeaways? And it might be an opportunity to set a goal. What are you going to do next? Is there something that you'd like to read more about or learn more about? Is there something that's resonated with you and stood out to you as something you'd like to implement? And then write it down or share it with someone. When we come up with this kind of a next step and make it real by talking about it or writing it, it significantly increases the chances of us actually doing it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that that's been helpful for you. Again, if you're watching on my website, you can leave a comment or ask a question down below if there's something you'd like me to talk more about. And if this type of video has been helpful for you, I'd really welcome any feedback.